Start by doing just some opening remarks, and then I'll outline the agenda. The agenda should be in the chat for those of you who just made it. Maybe we can get it sent again to follow. This is the Racial Equity Subcommittee meeting. We will be recording this meeting for those of you who want to watch the meeting later, or for those of you who don't want your camera on. And so we're going to go ahead and get started. My name is Marcia Perez, and I am the chair of the Racial Equity Subcommittee with the Portland Community on Community Engaged Policing. Can I get other PCCEP members to introduce yourselves really quick, please?
Hi, everyone. I'm Ann Campbell. I'm a PCCEP member. Welcome.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Amy Anderson. I chair the Behavioral Health Subcommittee. We meet on the first Tuesday of each month.
Good evening, everyone. Lakiana Drury, alternate co-chair of PCCEP.
Any other PCCEP members? All right. So in the midst of the last couple of weeks, we've seen terror from white supremacy in our nation. We also witnessed history yesterday by welcoming our first female, first Black, first Asian American Vice President, Kamala Harris. So I wanted to take the time to acknowledge that. And although so many of us have said we survived 4 years, it's so incredibly important to remember that so many people didn't make it. And so we're here tonight to be their voices, to seek justice and accountability. We're here to hear from community around issues with race and inequities related to policing here in Portland, so that we can develop some meaningful recommendations. So I'm going to read the mission of the Racial Equity Subcommittee. I also want to be mindful that we have interpretation services, so I will try to talk slower. For those of you who need interpretation services, there's a little globe at the end of the screen that you can select. Our mission is to advance racial equity by giving voice to families of color and of low socioeconomic backgrounds, by identifying areas of discrimination that require change, trust, and the embedding of equity in various capacities. We're going to recap a meeting that we had last month, go over some recommendations, and we're going to open it up to hear from community members from the Latino community. Last month, we hosted an incredibly brave and telling panel of Black community activists, along with Portland police officers, that came together to discuss why they do their work and how they envision community safety and what some of the goals are for 2021. Following this format, we've decided that we are going to be giving space to different communities each month, and we've chosen to spotlight the Latino community tonight, and we'll hear from folks shortly. So I wanted to see if anybody wants to see the video. Claudia, if you could send that, and then Lakiana, if you want to help debrief kind of what we heard in that video, and also we'll talk about some next steps. In that panel, I mean, sorry.
You want me to go right now?
Yeah, can you just debrief a little bit since you did a lot of that coordinating?
Yeah, so last month, December, there's so much that happened, it's hard to even put together where that was. We held a really powerful panel that included frontline activists and police officers from the Portland Police Bureau in a dialogue about what we envisioned for 2021 in terms of community safety. And I believe it was the only time during 2020 that police officers and frontline activists shared space for a community panel. And that was a really important thing that needs to happen more. That's really where we see PCCEP's role in community or police accountability, is to provide that platform. So just really want to thank Marcia for her leadership in putting this one together tonight to engage the Latino community more. We have done in the Racial Equity Subcommittee, we did a panel or a similar event with Black women, And we just we're trying to look at our work and see what other groups and areas are missing. You know, we're a volunteer committee that does a lot of work, but we're trying to, we know that there's still areas that we haven't hit, and we take that work seriously. And creating this space tonight is kind of going off of what we did last month, which featured 3 Black activists, and really want to create space for the Latino community to have their voices heard and to hear from the community, their representatives from the community, knowing that it's not everybody, right? But that this is a cross-section of it and a place to jumpstart the conversation and really look at how PCCEP can elevate their voices in terms of what they need to see from in terms of policing. So last month's panel, I think, was a great way to kind of kick off what we want to do this year. And as Marcia said, really try and elevate other voices. So that includes the Native American community, that includes the Asian community. There's so many groups that we haven't hit yet that we would like to engage. So welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thank you. So one of the things that we try to be really intentional about when we hold these spaces is that we want to make sure that the city, the mayor, and the police are engaged, as we've been asked to engage the community, and that they're creating responses. And so as an action item, we have requested a work session with the mayor and chief of police and some from city council to have a work session to discuss that. And I'd like to incorporate this this meeting as well. And so we'll talk more about that at our quarterly meeting that's hosted with the mayor tomorrow, actually. So I wanted to provide those of you who've been following that with the next steps that we have developed. Do folks have any questions or feedback before we go into the review of the recommendations? All right, so we're gonna just move on to the next agenda item. This will be pretty quick, and then I want to go ahead and give the floor to community members. So I'm gonna ask if we can send those to, actually folks should have gotten those, but we're gonna go over the letter of acknowledgement. So back in November, the Racial Equity Subcommittee meeting and the Behavioral Subcommittee, thank you, Claudia, hosted a joint forum, and we developed 2 different recommendations out of that forum. And we just wanted to put this on your radar. We'll be presenting it at our next full body meeting next week. And I hate to put you on the spot, but would you mind going over this one, since you did so much work on it? Would love that. Thanks.
As Marcia said, this was put together after a joint meeting that we held. And we also have held numerous listening sessions since last spring and the murder of George Floyd. So that also informed us. So this recommendation, would you like me to just read it or just talk about it? I'll just read it. Okay. Yeah. And also just to kind of give an overview, PCCEP, that's one of the things that we do, is that we recommend things to the mayor and the chief of police in our city. They have, I believe it is 30 days to respond after we send them our recommendation. This recommendation was put together by a number of us, and we are going to be presenting it to our full board next Tuesday, and we will vote on it. And if it does pass by a full vote, then it will go to the mayor and the chief of police. So let me just read it. We, the members of PCCEP and the community, request that a formal letter be sent out within 7 to 10 business days or less, acknowledging the passing of an individual who has been involved in a lethal force event, expressing to the family the remorse for the loss by their loss by the city. We also recommend that a follow-up visit be done by trained staff to provide the family support services for their loss, if they so choose. Can you go down a little bit, Marcia? Officer-involved shootings and other instances of force result in serious injury or death are a significant event for officers in our community. Despite the circumstances, it is imperative that the event is handled diligently and that the persons impacted, as well as the community, are handled with care and compassion by city officials. Portland Committee on Community Engaged Policing members asked that the original recommendation brought forth by the Subcommittee for People with Mental Illness be noted. This recommendation was brought forward, I believe it was last fall. The Subcommittee for People with Mental Illness was disbanded and the new Behavioral Health Subcommittee was created. I don't know if we want to highlight this recommendation or people can view it later, but we're kind of building off of that. In the last year, PCCEP has heard from numerous community members detailing many ways justice would look like for people who are impacted by police violence. The community continues to demand transparency, accountability, and justice for all. Victims of police violence leave behind family members who often feel like their loved one didn't matter and that the victim's life didn't matter to city officials. This acknowledgement will not only help the families of those killed by acknowledging their loss and grief, it can help to build a community collaboration and trust. How does this recommendation redress barriers to racial equity? People of color in Portland are disproportionately policed. The most recent OIR report shows that 5 of 10 incidents result in death and 4 were people of color. How does this recommendation improve outcomes for people with behavioral health issues, challenges, and/or in crisis? The lawsuit that led to the settlement agreement was rooted in disproportionate policing of people with mental health challenges or perceived to be in behavioral health crisis. This recommendation seeks to humanize a death and bring comfort to the loved ones of those left behind. How are marginalized and underrepresented communities, including those who will be affected by this recommendation, engaged to shape, write, and otherwise develop this recommendation? This recommendation seeks to elevate an original recommendation brought forth by the Subcommittee for People with Mental Illness. In addition to the work of the previous SPMI committee, PCCEP has held numerous listening sessions where community members spoke of the need for this recommendation. Additionally, PCCEP members met with the original SPMI members to include their input in this recommendation. I want to add additionally that we have shared this with various community groups. And then on this form, we are to answer those questions and then list resources. And these are, some of the resources are our previous meetings, and you can check those out later. Does anyone have any questions or comments?
I think we've heard a lot from PCCEP. If it's possible, I'd love to give this, because we're short on time, to give the opportunity to community members who want to comment. That way we can make any updates before we present in next week. So I see Maria Delgado, I see your hand up.
Sí, gracias. Creo que, bueno, lo que he estado escuchando, creo que coincido con muchas cosas. Mi nombre es María Delgado, trabajo para Unite Oregon en el área de educación con padres de las escuelas públicas de Portland. Ya llevo casi alrededor, voy a hacer, okay, yeah.
Do we need the interpreter to interpret in English? How are we doing? Oh, sorry.
Let's check that. I'm sorry to have to jump in, Maria. Lo siento. If you're not a Spanish speaker, you still have to click on that little globe thing and select English if you need English translation. So whether you're speaking English or Spanish, you still have to pick a language, no matter which language you need. So if you're not a Spanish speaker, please click on English now so we can hear the translation.
Ok, entonces lo pongo en inglés ahorita para hablar yo en español.
Either way.
Ok. Ok. Entonces, trabajo para Unite Oregon y trabajo con estas familias ya casi 6 años. Y lo que he estado observando es que en las escuelas, la disciplina, cuando la escuela ya no puede, pero que también no les dan los recursos de apoyo a los estudiantes, se dirigen con el oficial de policía que está dentro de la escuela. Y lo que pasa con el oficial de la policía es que ellos los llevan a la juvenil. Eso significa para mí que no les están dando oportunidades a los estudiantes en la disciplina, la escuela les tiene que dar recursos, mas sin embargo no está pasando eso. Los estudiantes, en vez de llevarlos a un sistema académico, los están llevando a un sistema judicial. Les están abriendo ya un expediente judicial y eso creo que no, para mí no es. Yo vivo en Gresham y está pasando lo mismo. Mi hijo pasó por eso y en Portland está pasando lo mismo. Entonces, creo que es muy importante que los oficiales de policía tengan capacitación de equidad e igualdad para saber cómo tratar a las personas que tienen una IP, en este caso con los estudiantes, ya sea por la salud emocional, porque se confunden cuando es una disciplina o que es un estudiante con una salud emocional que necesita apoyo. Entonces, estoy de acuerdo en que se tienen que tocar esos puntos con los oficiales y con las escuelas, que ellos son los responsables con los estudiantes en darles el apoyo necesario a ellos y a sus familias. Gracias.
Gracias, Maria. I just want to reiterate, I know that we were giving feedback to the recommendation, and this space tonight really is for community, and so it's okay that we we jumped around a little bit. I know that Maria has to leave at 6, and so I really appreciate her bringing that feedback for those of you who were able to navigate the interpretation. She brought feedback regarding the need for police to have capacity to work with youth in understanding their role in schools, understanding their role and discipline, in kicking students out and inadvertently not creating public safety. So Maria, thank you for your time. And I'm taking diligent notes, so this is all being recorded as well. In honor of that, I think we might go, if PCCEP is comfortable, maybe we'll go ahead and skip the feedback for recommendations. Can I get a head nod, a thumbs up? Okay, cool. So we've got a lot of people on here tonight who have things they want to share. And so we'll move on to the next piece, which is really giving the space to community. And so like Black communities that we've heard from and hosted over the last several months, Latino communities are often poor, racially and socially isolated, and heavily policed. There is significant distrust with law enforcement, both with local and federal agents such as ICE. And so if we want to build community and build greater trust within the community and policing, I wanted to host the Latino community here tonight. And I actually really want to take a moment to honor those of you who have done the work well before me. I identify as a Latina. I am not from Portland, and I know many of you on this call have been doing this work and elevating this work with your different experiences and advocacy for a really long time, dating probably beyond the 2001 officer-involved shooting of Mejia Put, who was killed inside of a psychiatric hospital. I know you're tired and I know you still want action. So I know we have Mr. Jose Angel Gutierrez here, who's one of, I was able to read a little bit about him and share it. And I'll let Virginia, you could do an introduction. As one of our most influential leaders in Chicano history. And we've got Bertanino and Jose Luis, who's going to jumpstart us in the conversation tonight on laying the ground on what are the needs of the Latino community related to policing. So Virginia, would you like to give a quick introduction before we get started?
Can you hear me? Am I unmuted?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, good. I want to first thank Jose Angel Gutierrez for joining us tonight, because I know he's a very busy person. He used to live here in Independence, but he grew up, and I'm going to let him introduce exactly everything he's done and a little bit about the history. But I just wanted to say that he is a very influential person. He was the first one that started OCHA here in Oregon, which was the Oregon Council for Hispanic Advancement, the first nonprofit organization through United Way. And he has a whole history that goes way back here in the 1980s, like he said. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce him and kind of let him give you a big spill of in brief what he does. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jose Angel. I'm just glad you're here and I'm excited.
Well, thank you, Virginia. That's my #1 fan in Portland, or maybe because I don't recognize many of the people and names that I'm seeing, but I do have a long history with Oregon. I went out there first with the Colegio Cesar Chavez and then started teaching at what was called Western Oregon College, and then became State College and now university. And restarted the Hispanic Commission for when it was the Governor's Commission, and the legislature had stopped funding. Well, a lot of stuff. Okay, but then I had to leave because they started terminating people, reduction in force from Western Oregon. And then I worked for United Way. That's where I got busy with OCHA and all that. But I finally had to leave the state because there was just no way to make money to feed my family, and I got a very large family. So I went back to Texas and became a lawyer. That makes money. So I have applied several times to get back into Portland State. I've taught there in the summer. I've taught online. But the politics by the people running that Latino Chicano stuff there are vicious. They don't want a real person. So you can Google my name, and by that I mean, the production of scholarship, the books you write, stuff. They don't want me around because they're embarrassed, and they don't do much, especially getting involved with the community. And I think part of what the work you're doing should also reach into those entrails at Portland State, because that's a big institution that's got a lot of resources that can help you with your work. I'll shut up because you're getting slandered in the media right now by saying that in Portland and Seattle, the anarchists have been rioting and they burned down the Democratic Party office in Portland and so on. But they don't specify who they mean by anarchists and anti-fascists. I think you're getting slandered. So I think maybe you ought to have a little footnote or endnote to correct some of that mis and disinformation that the media puts out about the protests in Portland. I congratulate you. Keep up the good work. Maybe if they hire me, I am an applicant for running that program in Portland State. If I get hired, I'll be part of your club.
Jose, before you leave, can you actually talk a little bit about community policing and what you recommend for the Portland Police Bureau, especially with all the riots that have happened and a lot of people that don't trust the police? Can you just talk a little bit about that, or have any ideas or suggestions?
Well, first vocabulary, I don't think that people rioted. I think people rebelled. There's a big difference. The police riot, the people rebel. So you need to control your message. You need to define your terms, and you need to know that just like you may know what the police are up to, they also know what you're up to. So, I'm not trying to cause any kind of divisions and things, but you need to be very aware that political intelligence is a big job of what they do. And of course, the messaging is very important. But and don't forget the Border Patrol, the Homeland Security people. Those are those soldiers that went in without name tags and, putting people in unmarked vans. That's the private army that Trump was going to use at Homeland Security. And nobody looks at them. They also have the Border Patrol, but those do have uniforms and things. So I think you ought to broaden the definition of police work you're doing to include them, because those are very, very nefarious and vicious kind of people with no government. Now, this fella, Mayorkas, who's going to, if he's confirmed, and head up Homeland Security, let's remember that, he is of Cuban ancestry, and now he's said that he's supposed to be progressive and liberal and whatnot. Maybe so, but there is a big difference between the Cuban Hispanics and Latinos, and Enrique Tario is a Cuban. That's the head of the Proud Boys. That's not my kind of Latino. So I don't know anything about Mayorkas, but I just say we got to be careful, because those Cubans all got paid to come, and they slander everybody else who has to be hunted by them. So we just got a lot of work to do. Thank you.
Thank you, Jose Angel. Thank you for being here from afar. I want to encourage folks who want to give feedback and talk about what's going on in the local Latino community, and what are some of the needs that you guys are experiencing that you'd like the police department to be aware of. And I encourage you to speak in your native tongue. So if it's more comfortable for you to speak in Spanish, please feel free to do so. And those who do not speak Spanish can continue to do the interpretation link so that you can hear it interpreted in your native language. So if we could get, I'd like to pass it on to Bernardino. Oh my God, I'm just butchered your name. I got called Marcia today like 3 times. So
I think I called you Marcia.
You did. Okay, payback.
Sorry. I'm
now
sorry.
Go ahead.
That's okay. My name gets destroyed all the time, so I'm used to it. It's Bernardino. So yeah, thank you everyone for giving me an opportunity, especially Marcia, for inviting me. Actually, I've been in Oregon since 1995, so I know that there's others that have been here for much longer. But I was very actively involved with the efforts, and actually had several conversations with Chief Croker right after the Mejia Put killing. And it was interesting because I didn't see a lot of Latinos involved when that happened. I think the Latino Network sort of withdrew a little bit back from being involved with recommendations toward the police. I was actively participating and giving recommendations. A lot of people actually don't know, but Chief Croker came from Rampart Division from Los Angeles Police Department, and he actually left a very bad legacy there, stopping Latinos and planting drugs, part of the Rampart that he actually supervised. He was brought in here as a chief, and what he brought was tactical policing philosophy. And what that did was actually kind of militarize the police department. And with the Bush administration, it even expanded more militarization across the nation. And that's when we started seeing more killings. After the Mejia Put killing, we saw more killings happen, especially here in North Portland among the African-American communities. One of the things that I recommended at the time was that they actually should implement community policing philosophy, which is diametrically opposed to tactical policing. But with the Bush administration, it kind of made it really difficult. And I think the Portland Police Department tried to do both at one time, but that's very, very difficult. After being involved with that effort, for some reason, there was some exclusion because they did a whole new revamping. There was community policing offices around Portland metropolitan area. There was one here in North Portland over here on Kenton. But they said community policing office, but it really wasn't following community policing philosophy, because when I went to the office there just to talk to officers, I was actually rejected and pushed out. I actually wrote a letter of the way that I was treated, and then there was some response, some investigation, and but I never really saw any kind of changes in terms of connection with the community, having an office where it should be welcoming for the community. And so it felt really uncomfortable. I think one of the recommendations that I will make here again, after 20 years or so, repeating it, is I think there needs to be more community policing in terms of the efforts, like for example, opening up an office space, perhaps maybe in Clara Vista, where there's an officer or two officers that work out of that office, that get to know the community. Other areas where there's concentrations of minority populations, Spanish speaking or anything like that, like St. John's. I know that they closed the offices over here in St. John's because of budgets or what have you, but I think smaller offices where there's officers that can work out of the place, but be welcoming to the community, to make connections and build relationships. That's community policing. I think the other piece, Maria made a very good point. Portland Police is no longer in the public school districts. The school communities actually had police officers, SROs, school resource officers, but there was a big disconnect because the lens that the police have is very different from the objectives of the school districts in terms of education. And one of the things that happened a lot was that administrators, when they had a problem student within the school community, they actually reverted to the SROs to address something that happened. For example, if a kid was stealing a lunch card to get a lunch from a kid because he didn't have money, instead of the school addressing it in terms of education toward that kid, that child, what they would do is they would involve the SRO. The SRO, what does he do? Well, he stole a lunch card. Well, that's identity theft. And so he writes a police report, sends it to the juvenile department, and guess what? Then he's got an identity theft charge, gets adjudicated on that. That's a very serious charge. That actually gives the kid, a minority or a Latino kid or African American kid or what have you, make them feel like he's now a criminal. And instead of educating them, we're criminalizing them. So it's kind of like that pipeline to jail. So I think one of the things, even though now Portland Public Schools went through this whole blah about whether you should have the SROs in school or not, I'm glad that they do not. But the other thing, on the other hand, if those SROs and the police departments had a real community policing philosophy angle, they would have entered into those schools with that lens and be able to do some really effective building of relationships with our younger children, and the schools doing what they're supposed to be doing is educating them. So and there's more recommendations of that, but I don't want to focus on school communities. I would rather focus on overall community of what's going on. In terms of recommendations, I think, even though now I think, with the defund police makes it a lot more difficult, but officers, I think, on foot beats, on bike beats, I think build more relationships with the community because they get to know the people who are within those communities. And I think the other piece is that police officers, especially the ranks, the higher ranks, need to also be involved in such as meetings like this, like here's the Latinos talking, and then where are they? And I know you're going to take the information and give them recommendations, but then they're going to hear it through a piece of paper or from you, and then they're going to water it down and it becomes, I think they need to hear from us directly. And so those are some of the recommendations I want to provide. Again, I try to not take things personally, even though, being excluded and being either not heard or anything makes it really challenging for a person to feel a bit upset. I think that one of the things that has made the possibilities for me to work with youth, to do prevention, because my role right now is working as I'm the Washington County, although I live in St. John's, I'm the Washington County Alcohol and Drug prevention education coordinator for all of Washington County. And so, I deal with a lot of coalitions and contracts with the police departments in Tiger, Tualatin, Forest Grove, Hillsborough, with the decoy operations. So, I'm working very closely. I know the culture. I graduated from the Los Angeles Sheriff's Academy. I know the police culture. I know the community, and I know the schools communities. And my master's degree is in education. This is why I know the communities, school communities. So anyway, those are just some feedback I'd like to offer to you, is that more community policing is very vital and important at this time and should be focused on, not tactical policing. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for all of the information, the historical context that you bring, and all of your work in the last years, decades, really. And so appreciate your voice here tonight. I want to open it up to Jose Luis, and then if there are others who would like to use the raise your hand function, and we're going to open it up to the rest of the community. We want to center Latino and Latina voices. So if you identify as someone in that community, please share your experience and what you hope to gain from tonight, or whatever you feel is appropriate. This is your time.
Gracias, Marcia. Hey, so my name is Jose. Thank you for inviting me. I'm here representing the Northwest Instituto Latino. I want to say kind of like what Bernardino said. I was going to start with this, like, county commissioners, they want us to come. They want communities to come. If they really want the community to really feel like they're being heard, they need to be here. They need to be here. This is what happens every single time community events like this happen. Community comes out, we pour our hearts out, and we say what we need and how we've been suffering, and there's really nobody who's really saying we need the information is here, right? So we have the mayor, we have the county commissioners who say we need this information from the community, but they're not here. So that for me shows a disrespect, because you want this from the community, but yet you're not here to say that this is valuable information to you. Now, I can tell you here, just in the panel, there's people like Bernardino, Virginia Salinas, I saw Rodolfo. He was around here. I don't see him anymore. Rodolfo Serna. These are people who've been around for years in the community, advocating for racial equality, for fair treatment when it comes to police brutality. Things that have happened in our communities. We've said this over and over. This is like a recording. We've said it over and over and over, and I am tired of saying it. I am tired of saying how much the police and the government has hurt our communities, and I think the action is they need to come to us and tell us how they're going to make changes. Like, how are you going to approach our community? What are you going to do to engage us? Because at this point, the reason you're not seeing the Latino community or the Latinx is because you haven't been at the table. You sent people to get the information, but you're not there. So by you not being there is just showing you really don't want to hear us. You really don't want to make a change. We've had, like I said, there's been so many advocates in our community, but we haven't seen the change. I think you sent a text if there's any police officers here. I didn't hear any response. I didn't hear any official members of the city being here. So for me, that's a big thing. Like, I need action from them. Like, I'm tired of people saying, come into the community, right? And I'm talking about my community, but also communities of color, saying, what do you want? Like, asking us, what do you want, rather than saying, how can we change? Like, what do we, come with the proposal. Come with a proposal to me and tell me, this is what I'm gonna do different. This is how I'm gonna treat you different. This is how I'm gonna engage the community. Because I think what we need when we talk about police reform is we need officers who are gonna engage the community a different way, because the way that they're engaging the community now, it's not working. We need officers who have been educated in mental health. They have some substance use training. They have some mental health training, so that when you're talking to, when you're trying to deal with a situation, you're not using force, or you don't require, you immediately to, you react and you use force. You need someone that speaks the language of the people and that look like the people, right? But I know we keep asking, that we need more police officers of color, and then the city of Portland says, well, we don't have anybody because nobody's applying. Well, you have to look back. You can't just look at trying to hire somebody now. You need to, start scholarships for people. Do outreach in schools and start scholarships for people of color. Because one of the things that people of color like myself, Latinos, African Americans, is that there's no opportunities for education. Or education, unless you're wealthy, you're going to have an educated. So there needs to, the city of Portland is going to have all this money from defunding the police. Why don't you put it in education? Why don't you put it in developing some scholarships, in outreach, in like community, the criminal justice field, right? Doing some outreach, doing some ride-alongs, talking to students at high schools, and really in a non-negative way, non-violent. Maybe you're not wearing your uniform that day, right? And you're just having a conversation. You're having a meal with the kids at school. Maybe you're going to a community and you're doing an event. I was just telling Marcia that there was a community center, the on Killingsworth and across the street from the Bienestar building where Virginia Salinas works on 60th and Killingsworth. There used to be a sugar shack, right? There used to be a strip joint, and right across the street there was a large Latino community, and so that was being influenced by all this bad stuff that was going on in this strip joint. There was a few years ago, there was a few organizations that came together and said, we're going to we're going to get rid of this place first. They got rid of the person that was running it, and they said, we're gonna demolish this place, and we're gonna bring the community together to see what they want to build. Well, the community came out and said, look, what we need in that place is a rec center. We don't have a place, for our kids to do something positive. The reason we have so much police activity here is because our kids are bored. Our kids are getting in trouble. Let's build a rec center. Let's create something there for the community. They went out and said all of this, and nothing ever happened. Nothing. I mean, that place is still vacant. What I'm hearing about that place is going to be sold to like a factory. I mean, we got to think outside the box. We got to think about, like, how can we engage these communities, and how can we create positive positive activities that's going to engage our community at an early age, like intervention. I come from the substance use field. Even when you talk about Measure 110, Measure 110 is removing all the prevention money that's coming out. All the prevention money that went to our children is being moved somewhere else. And so we got to think about, it's a bigger. We have to create a bigger change, not just the immediate need. It has to go back. If we want to have more officers of color, if we want to have more officers that look like us, we need to invest in education, and we need to outreach at an early stage so that people, and we need to also provide a better benefit for people who speak different languages, people who are from those communities. Because the other thing is that, as a person of color or a person who speaks multiple languages, you come to a position and you get paid the same wage, and you have the same, but you get more work because now you're bilingual, you're bicultural, and so now they give you more work, but you get the same amount of pay. So there's also have to be a benefit. Like, if you're going to hire people of color, you need to provide something different. And so, thank you.
Thank you, Jose. I appreciate that. A lot of really good information, a lot of really good insight, and I'm taking notes of all those recommendations, and I couldn't agree with you more. Do we have other folks that would like to comment?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, Marcia.
Really quick, Virginia, can you give me 1 second so we can see?
Sure.
Theo, what was that?
I just wanted to, there's a few folks who just came in recently, and I just wanted to remind folks, if you need interpretation, there's a little globe right there on the bottom of your Zoom screen. You just click on that, whether you need English or Spanish. You do have to pick one. I just wanted to remind, I don't mean to interrupt. Sorry, Marcia.
No problem. And really quick, I'm looking at the chat, and I know that we do have some representatives from the city. We have some folks from the equity department and the mayor's staff. We also have Miss Erica Pruitt from the Department of Community Justice here tonight. Thank you for being here. And if I missed you, go ahead and just write it in the chat and I will go ahead. Go ahead, Virginia, if you want to.
Yeah. Oh, see, I'll go ahead and I actually would want to pass the baton to other community members that have not had the chance to speak. But I just briefly wanted to say that the contact office that we had with the Portland Police Bureau Center, there was a lot of reasons why it was closed down. And there is personal reasons that I don't think I could get into and share with everybody. But what I would like to say is that I would really like to see it open again. The only thing is that we're at full capacity, and of course right now we're during COVID times, but I think that it was working when it was working, if that makes sense.
Virginia, what was that? What was that center?
And I just feel that that the staff that was working on site before COVID hit, we were over capacity with space. And so like
I think she's breaking.
Like what Jose had mentioned across the street, I would love to see that as a one-stop shop.
Thank you. You were cutting out a little bit.
One-stop shop, kind of like a Fred Meyer's, where you can go there, you can get groceries, you can get social services, whether medical services. I mean, a combination of different things, a contact office for the bureau. But, you know, I'm not sure what's happening with that place. I don't know that anybody does know what's happening. So, yeah. I think the mayor should know that, though, and that would be a big one to share and see what we do with that. Yeah. So I'll pass the baton, though. Thank you. There's a lot more stuff that I could share in, but because I've been involved with a lot of the former Portland Police Bureau chief advisory meetings that we used to have that would give guidance or advice to the chief's office.
Virginia, can you write that in the chat? You're breaking up a little bit, so we couldn't hear what the name of the office was. But whatever your recommendations, we're also monitoring the chat. If you don't want to speak up or if you don't have good connection, go ahead and throw it in the chat and we'll capture all of that. I also recognize that we've got representatives from the Slavic Advisory Council here, and we have representation from Commissioner Mapp's office as well. Okay, can we hear? I see, Asena, I see your hand up.
Hi, everyone. Very quickly, I will share it in the chat, but there was a recommendation made about paying city staff more for being multilingual and using different languages in the workplace. And City Council last month approved that. So that will go into effect this year. I just wanted that to be known, and I will share that policy now. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that. Do we have other Latino community members or Latinas in the community that like to speak on their experience and what are some of the things going on for the community that you serve?
Well, let me just say again that this is an ongoing process. So this one meeting is not going to solve everything, and I hope that there's plans for us to continue to meet, and then at those other meetings we have more like officials, commissioners to come in and have a conversation. I'm open to even bringing, doing some more outreach and bringing more community members, because like I said, I've been around since 2001 advocating, but I know there's people been here, even like, I don't know, the person that spoke earlier, Angel, like he's been around for a long time. I mean, I remember Mecha, Jose Angel Gutierrez, but there are people out there in the community who have been around for so long, who can come and speak and can share specific stories or specific, and things that have worked. Because I remember being part of the gang task force, and we did a really good job. I think we did some of a good job, right? I think we did well. I think Rodolfo was part of that gang outreach, and he's silent. I don't know why. Rodolfo, I'm putting your name out there, but I think you should say something, because what you do brings a lot. A lot of your work also impacts the community in a very positive way.
Man, I really appreciate that. Thank you, everyone. My name is Rodolfo Redstone Serna. I'm new to the group, and I think I was just trying to be humble the first time and just learn as much as I can. And I appreciate this opportunity. I was invited by some folks that I'm working with in the county, Virginia and Alex, who are just doing some amazing work out there on the equity side. And on my own, in my own way for years, connecting with lots of different organizations, mostly to tap into the community, whether it be it the youth or the families, bringing them culture and art, trying to uplift them. We're up against so much, guys, a history of oppression, and the awareness that's coming up now, it gives me so much hope that we are moving in a progressive way. It's just so unfortunate that like every step is still so choppy because we're in the middle of it all still. Well, knowing that everyone here is like-minded, trying to make that change together, it just fills my heart. And I gotta say, the work for me has always been direct service, one-on-one with these kiddos. I go meet them at the detention centers, at the boys' homes, at the foster care homes, wherever they are, at the schools. To me, that piece is reaching them and being there meeting them where they're at, because I know they're already facing so many barriers. And it's not just that, it's that initial, I think that a part that's really missing with our kiddos is just that trust that even if they are involved in gangs or drugs, I don't believe that that's where they are, where they want to be in their hearts. And I treat them with like a complete open slate, and we start from scratch, and we work together. That's a big part of it. We work together to get out of it. I've been blessed with a skill to make big art. I make murals, but I've also been blessed to meet traditional people. I use all of these things to help me connect with the families, the kids, and we create events that are generated by everyone. And again, it's trying to create a positivity in the face of so much negativity. I tell you guys, the funerals that I've gone to, the ceremonies that I've had to hold, it's just so heartbreaking and so hard. I can think of any number of things that we can do to change it all. But really, I feel like for me, it's always been about that individual connection. So this big kind of shift for me, I guess I just want to start by saying I'm seeing so many faces that I already recognize. I know that this group is like-minded, so I fully support you guys in any way that I can. Moving forward, I know this is a great causa. This is a cause that people like Angel have been fighting for 30 plus years, but our people have been fighting for hundreds of years. So here I am in solidarity with all of you, offering whatever I have to give, and grateful for all of you being here too. Thank you.
Rudy, so good to see you tonight. Thank you for being here. Missed those days with working with you years ago as well. So I know your work, and I'm so glad that you're here and you brought us some more insight. Bernardino, we have your hand up. And so if you want to go.
Yeah, just very quickly, thank you. Because I know I already spoke at first, but I did write a recommendation in the chat that came up from some comments that were made. But I think the connections, again, in terms of community with the police, I think a really good start, as well as bringing back, is police officers going to elementary schools to teach kids how to ride the bike safely, traffic rules, those kind of things. Not only does it teach the kids about safety, and also teach them how to ride bikes and the traffic rules, but it makes a connection with the youth, seeing police officers as role models, and perhaps inspiring them to become police officers and building a relationship from the very young ages. The other thing that I also heard from Jose Angel was the messaging. I think the messaging is also extremely important, what comes out of the police department in terms of the community, particularly for the Latino Spanish-speaking communities, which are very multicultural, because we have a lot of indigenous communities from the Mayan, Oaxacan, Mixteco, Zapoteco, among others, from Guatemala as well, are coming up tremendously. Like, there's more Guatemalans that are speaking their native tongues. And so I think the messaging from the police department coming out to the communities. Also, I know that resources are limited. So, you know, foot officers or bicycle officers or community offices cannot be opened up, then assigning police officers to certain sectors and messaging them, the message out to the community, letting them know who they are, that they're there for the community, and building those relationships and getting to know the communities, I think would be a good start for making good connections. And lastly, you know, I really appreciate everybody else's feedback. Redstone, Jose Angel, who I've never really met until now. Your information is really valuable, and the work that you do, I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, everyone. I am just capturing the notes in the chat. So I'm gonna take a moment to just kind of review the notes that I've been taking, and you all can clarify. So I'm hearing a lot about community policing and meeting, like really getting in the community, having space in the community, meeting with youth and working one-on-one. I really like that recommendation that you just put out there. Regarding, you know, showing this good role model piece while also teaching different skills and inspiring young people to maybe look up to the profession of policing. I'm hearing the need to create positive activities. Jose, you mentioned a really good point where the measure, is it 110? Is it 110?
Yeah, 110.
Takes away, you know, I think that those are the things that we don't, when we vote on things, maybe we don't take in the big picture. And so even me, this is news to me, of just like realizing that that takes away funding from prevention, that, you know, having worked in prevention in my previous role at the county, we were always fighting for pennies, right? And so knowing that, and how does the community come together to build those positive activities that are so incredibly needed for young people to stay engaged pro-socially in the community. I heard incentivizing bilingual, bicultural staff, so officers, and so having experience at myself, when you're bilingual or bicultural, often you are given more of a workload. And so, or I know that if it's not built into your salary, that it's kind of a pain to track hour per hour how much you're speaking the language, how much you're embedded in the community. And so I think that those are barriers to and, you know, being incentivized for a skill that that we have, or just a qualification that we have of being someone that's bicultural, bilingual. I heard Virginia say a one-stop shop where people can kind of go get everything, kind of like a wraparound service, and get groceries and have that community. And we mentioned, you mentioned the defunding of police, but we're reallocating those funds. And I know that the mayor has his 19-point plan, and there's all these ideas, but there hasn't been as many conversations that I've been aware of related to the Latino community of like, what are we going to do if we defund? Where do those funds go, and how specifically does it impact the Latino community? And then I see Virginia said something about a survey that she'd be willing to share that are just kind of ongoing information of issues that existed before that continue to exist today. So that would be something that would be greatly appreciated to continue to develop recommendations.
And I would say, and remember, ongoing meetings too, because we want to make sure that we continue to have this conversation. And one of the things that Rodolfo actually made me think is that one of the things that worked when we did gang prevention is that we had community liaisons. So sometimes you don't really have to hire more police officers that look like the people, but you can hire community liaisons that go and connect with the community and bring police over. And when there is a situation that they need to diffuse, I know when we did gang prevention, we did a lot of work around, the opposite gangs, and we had, we did a lot of our community liaisons would go and have, conversations with both parties and kind of like diffuse the situation if some things were going on, invite the youth at that point to do activities. I think there's opportunity to do, we don't always have to think like it has to be uh, police officers that they have to hire, but they can hire community liaisons that look like the community, and but at the same time invest that money in rec centers or activities so that there's things going on in the community and people are not just bored and doing stuff.
Thank you. I agree. I like the idea of community liaison. We did extend the invite for the current community liaison. I know that they had another meeting to attend, I believe, this evening. I want to reiterate and reiterate that focusing on community policing philosophy versus tactical policing. So Bernardino, you shared that. And then Rodolfo, you also mentioned that military creates incentives like getting rid of criminal record and bonuses for signing up. So expungement is a hot topic right now, and I think that that's really important to note. When we talked earlier about the unintended consequences of sending youth to police and then them getting adjudicated, there's this whole post system piece that hangs over oftentimes, which is that that they have a record, and those barriers that kind of begin to accumulate over time, which feeds into this cycle of disenfranchisement from the community. Would love to hear from others if you'd like to chime in.
I'd like to say something.
Please do. Thanks, Sid.
Hi. So this is my first meeting. I'm doing it for a class. I go to PSU. I'm a junior. I'm studying urban and public affairs. And one thing that I've noticed, and I work for somebody who is on the food board. And one thing that I've noticed is most people in my program and in the social work program are white people. And I think that for me in particular, I came to this program because I felt like my story was something that like other people would resonate with when I go into like face-to-face like work. My goal is to work with like houseless youth. And so I think it's important to really reiterate to young people of color that their stories are important, and we get away from this narrative of like white people in Portland saving people of color. And we need to like, as a community, tell kids like, your story of not going to college right away because you had X amount of siblings or because you were experiencing homelessness or whatever the case may be, resonate with other people of color and kind of like getting them in these front facing roles so that we can inspire each other. I didn't have that for a really long time, and it was growing up in a white city like Portland. It's very much like white people saving brown people, and this like cycle of just us not being able to like save ourselves kind of thing. That's like the narrative, and I would like to move away from that narrative because that's obviously just not true. And that's everything. Thanks.
I saw a few head nods. I think people resonated well with that. I appreciate you bringing that up, and I think that others share that sentiment that Portland is a very white city, and I couldn't agree more that we should be elevating and empowering the stories of young people. And I too experienced a different trajectory for my higher education, and had to compromise a lot to get where I am today. And I think there's a lot of power in the stories that we have. So I hope that this space can be one of those spaces to begin that as well. Do others want to chime in or have other things to add?
I'm curious. So I'm a student at PCC also, and I'm very new at all this and have a lot of like innocent ideas. Very like uninformed ideas also. So I recently did a project on Portland police and how they respond in the first few minutes of calls. And out of all the emergency calls that come into 911, police field like some 80 or 90% of those calls, and many of those calls are not necessarily calls where someone who is armed needs to be responding. And I'm curious, has there ever been any talk about having having 911 field some of those calls to different programs so that police aren't the first responders? You know, things like civil disagreements and things like that. I know currently it's possible to request a counselor who's trained in behavioral health to show up on scene when you make that call, so that they're at least somewhat informed, but the public doesn't know that that's a request that's possible. So there's a potential for education for the public about that, so you can call someone who may be able to understand and trust a little bit more. Again, I have a very outside perspective, so this is just what I'm learning so far. And then the other thing is that there's a program called TIP, Trauma Intervention. I'm a volunteer there, and we show up on scene when there's been an unexpected death of any kind, whether it's homicide, suicide, police, accident. And we're there to support survivors for the first few hours. And then also a week later, we check in, and a month later, we check in and wonder if we could be potentially of support for the agenda that you named at the beginning of this meeting. And I'm not necessarily a representation from TIP. I don't know if we can get involved in this way, but this is a service that we're offering that's very, very similar already. And the TIP is completely run by volunteers. They have a few, like 3 staff members, but otherwise we're all community supported. So thank you.
Thank you. I really appreciate you being here and willing to learn with us and sharing your perspective, and for your volunteer work at TIP. Back in November, we hosted a joint forum, which included TIP and representatives from BOEC, the Bureau of Emergency Communications. And I just put that recommendation. We kind of skipped over this because I wanted to hold the space for community to speak on what they had to talk about. But one of the recommendations that we just developed out of that joint forum was to actually create a process where TIP would be requested by PPB when there was an officer involved shooting or use of force incident where it left family members behind, because especially for those impacted by police violence, they're not seen as a victim, they're seen as a suspect. And so they don't give very many services. And so what we've asked is that the Bureau consider, or what we will be asking is the Bureau consider making that a practice, so that the mothers, the grandmothers, the fathers, the brothers and sisters of the person who was harmed by police have access to trauma intervention services. So thank you for your service, and I've included that recommendation if you want to look it over. And also the forum that we held in November is also on. We can get that to you.
It's linked on the recommendation too.
Yeah, at the end of the page. We also have Portland Street Response, which is based from the Cahoots model down in Eugene. Somebody mentioned, a couple of folks have mentioned that. And we at the PCCEP have a behavioral health subcommittee. And so for those of you not aware, we give recommendations based on the settlement agreement that came out of the DOJ back in 2012, which indicated that there is disparate use of force against people with real or perceived mental illnesses. So we have different subcommittees, and our chair to the behavioral health subcommittee can speak more on that if she'd like. So Amy, do you want to add any context?
Yes, I'd very much like to continue these conversations at the next behavioral health unit, behavioral health meeting. I'm hoping to get some, I would like to get a presentation on the Portland's 5-year strategic plan or community engagement plan, so we can start hearing from PBB as to what they are envisioning going on in the future for our communities. So we meet the first Tuesday of each month, and I would so welcome anyone and everyone to come, because this conversation is very important, and we need to let people know it's time for the other side to stand up and get involved. If they want us involved, they need to be involved. So come join us. This is a great conversation, and thank you all for sharing. It's really important. I've had a lot of good experience with OCHA and the Latino Network, so I have a high regard for the work you guys have been doing all these decades, so thank you. And it'd be good if you wanted to stay in touch with PCCEP, because we could always use the support too. We need everybody's help on this one. So thank you. Oh, and the big meeting, the big PCCEP meeting is next Tuesday. If you check our website, you'll get a listing of all the meetings that we hold during the month, and everything is open to the public. And we take comments through email, so we can hear what you guys are thinking via email as well. So thank you, Marcia.
Thanks, Amy. I want to acknowledge that we have about 15 minutes left. Claudia, if you could add in here for folks who want to subscribe to get regular emails, you can go ahead and do that with the link that Claudia just sent in the chat. And all of our, most of our subcommittee meetings are recorded and then put on our website or on the YouTube channel, so you can go back and rewatch this if you're really bored and you want to watch something for that much time. Or your Netflix account ran out like mine does all the time, so you can go back and watch these. I'm curious, Rudy, do you want to expand on that? Do you want to ask your question?
Yeah,
okay.
you know, I'm just thinking about, no, thank you. I was just thinking about how the community that I work with often feels, you know, I've heard that expression of the invisible community, and I kind of agree, right? Like someone, like an officer comes knocking at the door, you don't know if it's immigration, you don't know if it's police, you just, you know, kind of peek out the window to see who it is. But it's not that, it's not invisible, it's that we have to hide. And I think that's because there's a fear. And how are you supposed to work with the police if you're afraid of them? I mean, you're supposed to work together with them. And so there's a trust that's not there. And somehow that piece needs to be built where the community can feel safe and they feel they can trust them and they can work with them. But until that happens, like I mentioned earlier, is I tried inviting police to come paint a mural with me with some of these kids. And some of my kids were like, you're whack, you know, like I'm doing something wrong. But really, truth be told, I'm just trying to build some kind of like normalcy, because some normality, because their lives are what's whack. It's not a whack. It's not normal. And so trying to kind of make it to where there's some police that actually care, that do want to help, these are them. This is the reality. They're not all like that. And it kind of building that trust in society, in me, in schools, it's important. And so police play a huge role in that. For my community, they're afraid. And so how do we build that? How do we work towards having some trust there? And it's a hard issue because of immigration. And so like, we're gonna relate police with ICE regardless, you know? And so how do we even differentiate? How, if that's, you know, what the police really want is our trust and our confidence, then that needs to be resolved. Thank you.
Yeah, I really appreciate you bringing that up. That was brought up many times in the individual conversations that I've had. And one thing that comes to mind, and I'll speak from my experience working in the Latino community, is that immigration is a huge barrier. It makes it so folks don't feel like they can call police because there's inconsistencies. You might have officers who will report to ICE and others who don't. And it's kind of like a game of roulette almost. Like you just never know, and people need to call police. People sometimes need to call police. I'm thinking and wanting to honor victims of domestic violence who are stuck at home right now in this COVID crisis that we're in, who have to be at home with their perpetrator, who are experiencing violence at another level, and can't call police for so many reasons. And I don't know what the answer is, you know, and how to build trust in those communities, but certainly acknowledging it and being in it and trying to get understanding is something that could be a good first start. And because the distrust is pretty debilitating. When I think about, you know, the youth that I used to work with who can't call police for so many reasons because of their affiliation or not, or who's in their neighborhood. There's just so much fear, right? And so I want to take a moment. If others don't have any other comments, I do know that there are some folks here that are working on community engagement, and maybe if others don't have ideas now, we can hear from some PPB representatives that have comments based on what they've heard tonight on, or want to give an update on the community engagement plan and how this information that we've heard tonight is going to be received or has been received. So,
Marcia, can I just
yes,
ask
go
one
ahead.
thing before you move?
Yes.
Have you guys done a study of how long it takes for police officers to respond to calls for people of color, like versus responding to a call for somebody who's white? Has there been done a study? Because the other thing that I could tell you is that, like, from my personal experience, when I've called police for, you know, X whatever reason, you know, the response time is a long time, but I know when people have called the police on me, it's like right away. So has it been like a study done around that? Like, what is the response time? Because I think there's also a trust, you know. I think people of color don't call the police because they say, well, you know, they're going to take an hour. By that time, you know, I deal with the situation myself. So I'm just thinking about that. Just something to think about.
Yeah, that's a great question. We often talk about like stops data, and it's you know, talking about race and breaking it down is always kind of challenging. But I do not believe that there's been a study specifically about response times by race. But we can definitely write that down, and maybe others who are here tonight, Mary Claire, if you have any comments about that, you might have more insight than myself.
Hi there, Marcia. I do not know off the top of my head if that study has ever been done, but I certainly can check with Strategic Services to see if we have anything about that. You know, the problem with that is that normally we wouldn't know when we're dispatched to a call where you're going, or, you know, who the potential subject or victim is. So I just don't know whether we'd have that kind of study for you.
Well, I think that, sorry to interrupt, I think that a good way is like neighborhoods, because there are neighborhoods in Portland that are predominantly white, neighborhoods that are predominantly people of color. And
Sure.
so if you live in inner Southeast Portland, they're coming pretty quickly. But if you live like in the numbers, it might take like a hot second for them to get there. And then by that time, like the problem, yeah, is resolved, or it doesn't really matter at that point.
Mhm.
The thing is too, is when you call, let's say a non-emergency number versus 911, I mean, you're literally told to call 911 if it's a life-threatening situation. If it's not, then you're highly recommended to call the non-emergency number. But if they call the non-emergency number, I mean, I've known of clients that have waited up to 8 hours for the police to come. So yeah, that's a big one.
It gets triaged in the same place. So that shouldn't be happening if they're getting into non-emergency, just
Well,
an FYI.
Sometimes what we've had in the past is we've had officers come and talk about that. But what they end up telling the client sometimes, if, you know, even if it's not an emergency and it's like really important, just dial 911 anyway. But yeah, I mean, that's what's happened in the past. But there's a lot of cases that I know I've waited with the police that I had to leave work because it was past the 8 hours. It's happened several times. And the clients end up staying there with the security guard, and they end up going home, and we just take their number, but it kind of cancels the call when they leave, you know?
That is true, Virginia. The Bureau would not deny that the response times are not what the Bureau would like them to be. And a lot of that is the number of resources. The number of patrol officers today is lower than it has been in a very long time. So, you know, it's just how many are on duty in that precinct or available to respond. And so you're right, the calls are, you know, get the first attention or priority 1 and 2, and the others are referred to, you know, a non-emergency or to, you know, file a report,
Right.
you know, online or what have you, depending upon the nature of the call.
Right. And there has been I wouldn't say a study, but we've had discussions about that with tenants, like literally how long it has taken. And I want to say it was under Chief Moose when that was done, but I know for a fact that, you know, right now the police bureau's under, you know, a level of capacity with police officers, especially, you know, with defunding, that makes it even worse. But yeah, the more you call into 911, of course, the more police officers or monies will be put into those locations like Lake Oswego versus Northeast Portland. So yeah, so thanks for mentioning that.
And I will tell you that is a big concern of the mayor's office as well. And I'm sure Asina can, you know, vouch for this, that the mayor has asked us to look at ways, which is why many officers are being returned to the patrol. You know, a lot of the units have been, you know, basically closed off. That's transit division, and other divisions in the Bureau are now going back to precincts to serve as patrol officers for that very reason, to try and address the, you know, we've done our own studies about response times, and, you know, it isn't good. And so they're trying to make internal, you know, changes, but it's still, you know, definitely, you know, problematic, and we're aware of that and trying to work to improve it.
Thank you. I see that Brody provided the link here in the chat for average response time by neighborhood. So that data is, there is a dashboard to that data. I am curious, Brody or Marlon, if you're with us right now, do you want to give a quick community engagement update before we close out? We have about 5 minutes left.
Yeah, so I can give a little bit. Obviously, community engagement is something that's kind of done by multiple different parts of the police bureau. So I can speak mainly to what our office has been doing, but there's also been a lot of work done by the Community Services Division, or CSD. A lot of Marlon and I's focus have been as of late has been kind of, we have a advisory of the Police Equity Advisory Council that is an advisory to us that we've kind of built up and have just done recruitments for, that we really have looked to try to make sure that that has really diverse representation as an advisory council. And as it comes to advisory councils overall from the Bureau, there's also the Chief's office now has a council that's pretty much composed of all the other councils. So that's, again, getting a lot of different groups in that. And we're also working on a lot of the stuff that's been put forward on the community engagement plan, particularly as it relates to training. A lot of the efforts that were in that kind of had to be shuffled by COVID. So a lot of the events we had planned were big meet and greet kind of events. And with COVID, that kind of, we weren't really sure how to translate that. And we're kind of putting the pieces back together with that now of seeing, okay, how can you do those kind of events that get that same personal intimacy, but in a way that is safe. So that's kind of been what our office has been working on in terms of kind of our bigger community engagement efforts as of late.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank you,
for that
Dottie.
quick synopsis.
And sorry that I didn't speak up earlier. My daughter is climbing over me at the same time. But thank you, Brody. That is correct. We are working in that capacity. I also like to say that that we did the community engagement, the community service division had grown significantly, but with COVID-19 and cuts, like we had to do some realignments. I don't know if this has been spoken to already, but they just got done growing their division because they cut when they got rid of YSD, we lost the youth services division. We got some of their members to be able to Tasha in the community service division. So she's been like our community liaison, one person for this whole time. We finally grown. And then with us not being able to, like we need to be able to decrease our response time. So they had to put all the officers that they put back in there back on patrol. So it's back to just being one person doing all the community work. And that's just where we are right now. We were advocating for that unit to grow, and then COVID-19 hit and budget cuts. And so this is just where we are currently, but that is something that we're advocating for and putting into the budget equity tool, saying that this unit, we can't say we're doing community policing to have one liaison. So we do need to grow in that area is what I'm trying to say. And I'm sorry, I am multitasking with parenting, so I'm in and out and I apologize.
Thanks, Marlon. I just want to, we are out of time today, and I want to honor your evenings with your families, and it's probably dinner time. Thank you all for being here. We had a really great turnout and people stayed engaged the entire time. For those of you interested in continuing, to staying involved in this work, please feel free to look at the website or email any of the PCCEP members. We'd be happy to meet with you one-on-one or invite you to different subcommittee meetings. This group has been going for a couple of years now. We have our large body meeting next Tuesday from 5 to 8. And we'll go over kind of a comprehensive overview of what all of the subcommittee groups are reviewing. And again, we hope to continue this dialogue. There is a Latino Advisory Council that's being developed right now with the Portland Police Bureau. So for those of you who want to continue, when that is released, I encourage you to get involved or continue to stay involved here. We do want to spotlight different communities every month. So if you have a community that you would like to suggest, or an activist from another community, I really want to use this space to empower the voices of those who are not being heard, and hold this space for different communities, like Lakiana and I mentioned before. We'd like to hear from the Asian community, the Pacific Island Asian community. There's a Slavic community. So I can go on and on, but that's where our intention is, and we'll go ahead and rotate. That does not exclude if those of you who want to bring these issues up, we will continue this work. And my commitment to you is to bring this up as we meet with the mayor and the mayor's staff to hold these recommendations, and hope that we can get some action out of it. With that, we are done for the evening. If you want to come back and watch this, it'll be posted shortly. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Marcia. Great meeting.
Good to see you all.